Welcome back to Inside a Killer's Mind. This is episode 2, A Trail of Blood. In our last episode, we examined the unsettling construction of Ted Bundy's psyche, the polished exterior hiding a cavernous void, the mask of sanity he wore to move through the world undetected. But a mask can only conceal, it cannot contain. Today, we leave the realm of theory and psychology and step onto the blood-soaked ground of his actions. We follow the phantom as he materializes, beginning a reign of terror that would stretch across a nation and leave a scar on the American conscience. This is the story of the hunt, the escape, and the final, brutal rampage. And most importantly, it is the story of the women who fought, who survived, and who were stolen from the world. To understand the trail of blood, we must first go back to the source, the fractured mind of Theodore Robert Bundy. Born in 1946, his early life was built on a foundation of lies. For years, he was raised to believe his mother was his sister and his grandparents were his parents, a deception designed to hide the shame of his illegitimate birth. This foundational deceit created a chasm in his identity. Outwardly, he was handsome, intelligent, and ambitious, a political science major with aspirations of a law career. But beneath the surface, a different person was taking shape, one consumed by deep-seated insecurity, resentment towards women, and a burgeoning obsession with violent pornography. He was a social chameleon, adept at mimicking the emotions and behaviors he saw in others, but incapable of feeling them himself. This was the genesis of the mask of sanity, a meticulously crafted persona designed to conceal the soulless predator growing within. The terror began quietly, as a whisper of unease in the Pacific Northwest during the early months of 1974. In a region known for its serene landscapes and progressive cities, young women, predominantly college students, began to vanish. At first, they were treated as isolated incidents, but as the months wore on, a horrifying pattern began to emerge. The first was Linda Ann Healy, a 21-year-old psychology major at the University of Washington. She was bright and beloved. On the morning of February 1st, 1974, she was gone from her basement room. Her bed was neatly made, a chilling detail, but a small bloodstain on her pillow was the only clue that something violent had occurred. One by one, more followed. The victims shared an eerie similarity. They were all young, attractive women with long hair, parted in the middle. On the night of June 11th, Jorgen Hawkins, a bright 18-year-old, vanished while walking down a brightly lit alley behind her sorority house after visiting her boyfriend. She was just 50 feet from safety. The audacity was shocking, but nothing could prepare law enforcement for what was to come. July 14th, 1974. A hot, sunny Sunday at Lake Sammamish State Park, teeming with thousands of people. Here, the killer revealed a new, horrifying level of boldness. Witnesses later described a handsome, charismatic man named Ted, his arm in a fake sling, struggling to load a sailboat onto his tan Volkswagen Beetle. He approached 23-year-old Janice Ott, who kindly agreed to help. She was never seen alive again. Incredibly, just 4 hours later, in the same crowded park, he used the same ruse on 18-year-old Denise Naslund. She, too, vanished. To understand these crimes, we must look beyond the what and into the why. Bundy's methodology in the Pacific Northwest was not random. It was a performance of psychological warfare. The ruse of the injured man, the cast, the sling, the crutches, was a masterstroke of predatory manipulation. It didn't just disarm his victims, it weaponized their empathy. He was turning society's best instinct, the desire to help someone in need, into a fatal vulnerability. This act fed his profound narcissism, reinforcing his belief that he was smarter, more clever than everyone else. He was a wolf, and they were the sheep, willingly walking into his trap. The choice of victims was also deeply personal. These intelligent, popular, and self-assured young women were likely surrogates for those who he felt had rejected or humiliated him in his past. Each abduction was a ritual of power, an act of possession where he could exert the ultimate control he so desperately craved, a control that had eluded him in every other aspect of his life. These were meticulously organized crimes, the terrifying expression of a mind that needed to dominate and destroy. As panic gripped the Pacific Northwest, the killer simply moved. In the autumn of 1974, Ted Bundy enrolled at the University of Utah Law School in Salt Lake City. He slipped seamlessly into his new life, a charming and dedicated student. But he did not leave his compulsions behind. On October 18th, the pattern began again. Melissa Smith, the 17-year-old daughter of the Midvale police chief, disappeared. Her abduction sent a shockwave through the local law enforcement community. 9 days later, her body was found in the rugged terrain of the Wasatch Mountains. Bundy was once again hiding in plain sight, a predator moving among the unsuspecting. But on November 8, 1974, the ghost made a mistake. Her name was Carol DeRonch, and one 8-year-old, she was shopping at a mall in Murray, Utah, when she was approached by a man who identified himself as Officer Roseland of the Murray Police. He told her someone had tried to break into her car and asked her to accompany him to the station. He was handsome, polite, and authoritative. Carol believed him. She followed him to his tan Volkswagen Beetle. Once inside, the polite demeanor vanished. He sped away, and when Carol demanded to see identification, he pulled over. In that terrifying moment, he tried to snap a handcuff onto her wrist. One cuff locked, the other dangled free. He then pulled out what she thought was a gun. Realizing she was in a fight for her very life, Carol did not freeze. She fought. She screamed, kicked, and clawed at the door handle as Bundy tried to subdue her with a crowbar. Her adrenaline and will to live were stronger. She managed to get the door open and tumbled out onto the road, into the path of oncoming headlights. A passing car saw the terrified young woman and pulled over. Bundy, his attack foiled, sped off into the night. Carol DeRonch was hysterical, injured, but alive. She was the one who got away. Her survival was more than just a fortunate event. For Ted Bundy, it was a profound psychological blow. To the malignant narcissist, failure is not a possibility. It is an existential threat. Carol DeRonch's escape was a catastrophic narcissistic injury. It shattered his self-perception as a flawless, godlike predator who held absolute power over life and death. He had been outsmarted, overpowered, and exposed by a victim who refused to be a victim. This failure would have festered within him, a source of intense humiliation and rage. She had not only survived, she had seen him, the real him. Her escape wasn't just a lost quarry. It was a challenge to his very identity, an insult that his fragile ego could not tolerate, and one that would undoubtedly fuel the escalating brutality of his future crimes. On August 16, 1975, a Utah highway patrolman spotted Bundy's VW lurking in a residential neighborhood. A search of his car revealed a killer's toolkit, a crowbar, a ski mask, rope, and handcuffs. The connection was made. Police arranged a lineup. Carol DeRonch, still traumatized, faced the row of men. Then, with a certainty that chilled everyone in the room, she pointed. "That's him." In 1976, Ted Bundy was tried and convicted of aggravated kidnapping. The mask had finally been ripped away. Extradited to Colorado for another murder, Bundy decided to act as his own attorney. On June 7, 1977, he used his library privileges to access a second-story room, where he jumped from an open window and vanished into the mountains. He was recaptured 6 days later. But the second escape would be meticulous. Back in a cell in Glenwood Springs, he spent months dieting, losing 30 pounds, and sawing a hole in his ceiling. On December 30th, 1977, he squeezed through, crawled through the ceiling, and dropped into an empty apartment. From there, he walked out the front door, a free man. These escapes were not merely about attaining freedom, they were the ultimate performance of his narcissism. For Bundy, being captured was the ultimate humiliation. Escaping was how he reclaimed his narrative of superiority. It was an act of public theater designed to mock and belittle the entire justice system. The police, the lawyers, the judges who dared to cage him. Each escape was a declaration. "You are not my intellectual equal. Your rules do not apply to me." He wasn't just fleeing a cell, he was reinforcing his grandiose self-image as a figure beyond the reach of conventional authority, a master manipulator who could outwit any system designed to contain him. The world was his audience, and this was his most defiant act. The Ted Bundy who arrived in Tallahassee, Florida, was a changed man. The cunning and caution were gone, replaced by a reckless, explosive rage. On January 15, 1978, just 2 weeks after his escape, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. In 15 minutes, he unleashed a frenzy of violence that left 2 young women, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, dead, and 2 others critically injured. He fled as silently as he entered, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror. The Florida rampage was a horrifying psychological de-evolution. The organized, meticulous predator of the Pacific Northwest was gone. The Chi Omega attack was disorganized, chaotic, and brutally excessive. The work of a mind that had completely unraveled. The mask of sanity hadn't just slipped, it had been incinerated. What was left was pure, unbound, narcissistic rage, a psyche in freefall, lashing out at the world that had dared to capture and humiliate him. Then came his final, most depraved act. On February 9th, he abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her middle school. Her murder represented the final stage of his devolution. It broke all of his previous patterns. She was younger than any of his other victims, and the crime lacked any of the careful planning of his earlier work. It was an act of pure impulse and opportunity, the ultimate triumph of his most monstrous appetites, committed by a man who had nothing left to lose and no humanity left within him. The end came not with a dramatic shootout, but during a routine police stop in Pensacola, Florida, on February 15, 1978. An officer, suspicious of a car weaving in the early morning hours, pulled over the driver. It was Ted Bundy, disheveled, desperate, and driving a stolen vehicle. The charismatic law student was gone. Only the monster remained. His cross-country reign of terror was finally over. The trial of Ted Bundy for the Chi Omega murders was a media circus, a spectacle that Bundy himself orchestrated. He was charming, defiant, and utterly captivating to a public unfamiliar with the concept of a killer who looked and acted like a movie star. But behind the performance, the evidence was damning. The most crucial piece came from forensic odontology. Bite marks left on the body of Lisa Levy were a perfect match to Bundy's distinctively crooked teeth, a physical signature of his savagery that he could not deny. Eyewitness testimony from a sorority sister who saw him leaving the house and fibers from his van matching the victim's clothing created an irrefutable web of evidence. On July 24, 1979, the jury found him guilty on all counts. As the verdict was read, Bundy's mask of composure finally cracked, revealing the hollow, defeated man beneath. He was sentenced to death. The guilty verdict was not just a legal conclusion, it was a cultural moment. The trial was one of the first to be nationally televised, and it introduced the American public to a terrifying new archetype, the handsome, articulate serial killer. Bundy shattered the stereotype of the creepy, socially inept monster lurking in the shadows. He was a man who could have been your neighbor, your classmate, your colleague. This duality, the monster and the man next door, created a morbid fascination that has endured for decades. The trial wasn't just about determining guilt, it was about the nation trying to comprehend how such profound evil could exist behind such a charming and intelligent facade. It was a public dissection of the mask of sanity and the horrifying truth it concealed. From Washington to Florida, Ted Bundy left a trail of devastation that officially claimed the lives of 30 women, though the true number is likely higher. He was a phantom who preyed on kindness, a wolf who wore the mask of sanity so convincingly that he almost got away with it all. But as we close this chapter, we must make a conscious choice to remember not the killer, but the lives he extinguished. Linda Ann Healy, who loved to ski. Jorgan Hawkins, who was afraid of the dark. Janice Ott and Denise Naslund, who just wanted to enjoy a day at the lake. Melissa Smith, a police chief's daughter. Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, sorority sisters with bright futures. And Kimberly Leach, a 12-year-old girl who never got the chance to grow up. They were not statistics. They were daughters, sisters, and friends. Their stories deserve to be told. Their memories deserve to be honored. For years, Bundy fought his execution, launching a series of appeals that dragged through the courts. On death row, he became a subject of intense fascination for psychologists, journalists, and law enforcement. He corresponded with profilers and authors, offering tantalizingly cryptic clues about his crimes while never fully confessing. This was his final stage, his last performance. He was no longer the hunter in the night, but the enigmatic puzzle in a cage, still controlling the narrative, still craving the spotlight. He even married Carol Ann Boone, a former colleague, while on trial, fathering a child from behind bars in a bizarre and desperate attempt to project an image of normalcy. But the walls were closing in. In the final days, with all appeals exhausted, Bundy's mask crumbled completely. The charming, defiant intellectual was replaced by a desperate, terrified man. He gave a series of death row interviews, most notably to evangelical Christian author Dr. James Dobson. In a rambling, self-serving confession, he blamed his actions on a lifelong addiction to pornography, a claim that many investigators and psychologists found to be a pathetic last-ditch effort to shift blame. He was a cornered animal, finally stripped of all his power and control. On the morning of January 24, 1989, at Florida State Prison, Theodore Robert Bundy was executed in the electric chair. Outside, crowds cheered, celebrating the end of a nightmare. The phantom, who had cast such a long, dark shadow over the nation, was finally gone. But the stories of his victims and the questions about how such evil could walk so comfortably among us would linger forever. The legacy of Ted Bundy extends far beyond the gruesome details of his crimes. His case became a watershed moment for law enforcement and criminal psychology. The sheer scale of his cross-country rampage, coupled with his ability to blend into society, forced investigators to develop new methods for tracking and capturing such elusive predators. The term serial killer was not yet in common parlance when Bundy began his reign of terror, but his crimes helped to define it. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, which was still in its infancy, studied Bundy's case extensively, developing profiling techniques that are still used today. Bundy himself, in a strange and chilling twist, even assisted investigators in understanding the minds of other serial killers while he was on death row. His case was a brutal and terrifying lesson, but it was a lesson that reshaped the landscape of criminal investigation, leaving an indelible mark on how we understand and pursue the darkest and most dangerous minds. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the darkness. The story of Ted Bundy is a chilling reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not those that hide in the shadows, but those who walk among us, wearing the mask of a friend. Join us next time on Inside a Killer's Mind, where we will be exploring the infamous Jeffrey Dahmer.